It started with a single knock, 3 sharp raps against old rotting wood, followed by silence. Somewhere on a desolate road, in the dead of night, a woman stood alone. Her car broken down miles from the nearest town. Her phone, nothing but a cold, lifeless screen. The road behind her stretched into darkness. The road ahead led only to that house. She had no choice. The cold was relentless, the wind biting through her clothes. A single light flickered in the window of the house just ahead. An old place standing alone against the emptiness, as if forgotten by time itself. There were no other homes nearby, no passing cars, no voices, just that house, and the growing certainty that someone or something was watching her. A shadow shifts behind the curtain. A barely audible whisper drifts through the air. She hesitated, a feeling she couldn't explain twisting in her stomach, but she ignored it. She stepped onto the porch. The wood groaned beneath her feet, the air thick, suffocating. And then she knocked. 1 second, 2, 3. No answer. A gust of wind rattles the loose window panes. She raised her hand to knock again, but before she could, a metallic click, the sound of a lock sliding open. The door creaked inward, revealing nothing but darkness inside. A voice barely above a whisper drifted out from the shadows. "Come in." What happened inside that house is a story few would believe, but even fewer would dare to forget. Because the moment she stepped through that door, the night was no longer hers to escape. A road that led nowhere, a house that stood in silence, and a woman who, in the absence of better choices, made the worst decision of her life. Her name was Sarah. She was on her way home after a weekend trip, taking the long stretch of highway that cut through miles of barren land. It was a drive she had made before, but this time something felt different. It started with a strange noise under the hood, a dull grinding sound, at first barely noticeable, but within minutes it grew louder, angrier. Then, just as she passed the last road sign before total emptiness, the engine gave out. The headlights flickered. The car rolled to a stop. And just like that, she was stranded. No cell service, no passing cars, nothing but the empty road and the creeping realization that she was utterly alone. A single chime, a notification. She scrambles for her phone, but the screen glitches, distorts, then dies completely. She wasn't superstitious. She didn't believe in ghosts or curses or things best left undisturbed. But that night, sitting in the middle of nowhere with nothing but silence pressing in around her, she felt something she had never felt before. A presence, an absence, something watching, something waiting. And then, as if on cue, she saw it. A house, small, old, with a single porch light barely illuminating its front door. No signs of life, no cars in the driveway. Just there. Sarah's breath shudders. She hesitates, glancing back at her dead phone, then out toward the empty road stretching behind her. No other options. She told herself it was fine. A simple house, a simple knock. Just ask for help, maybe use a phone, and be on her way. Footsteps crunch against gravel as she walks toward the house. Every step feels heavier, the air colder, thicker, like she's walking into something she shouldn't. As she reached the porch, something caught her eye, a curtain shifting in the upstairs window. A shadow, there for just a second, before it was gone. Sarah swallows hard, a deep breath. She lifts her hand and knocks. If she had known what was waiting for her inside, she would have turned and run. But by the time the door opened, it was already too late. For a moment, she thought she imagined it, that voice. It had been soft, almost distant, slipping through the cracks of the old wooden door. It didn't sound rushed. It didn't sound surprised. It was as if whoever or whatever was inside had been expecting her. A gust of wind rattles the house. The door, slightly ajar, yawns open wider with a low, dragging creak. Her pulse quickened. The air inside seemed thick, unmoving. From where she stood, she could see the dim glow of a lamp in the entryway, its light flickering as if unsure whether to stay or go. She hesitates. Her hands tremble, but she clenches them into fists, forcing herself to step forward. She told herself this was ridiculous. It was just an old house. Just a stranger offering help. There was nothing strange about that. Right? Her foot crosses the threshold. The moment she steps inside, the wind outside dies completely. The silence swallows everything. The warmth inside the house was immediate, almost too immediate, as if the air itself was pressing in, wrapping around her like something alive. She exhales, glancing around. The house is old, the wooden floor creaking beneath her weight. The wallpaper is yellowed, peeling at the edges. An old radio sits on a table, its dial twitching ever so slightly, though no sound comes from it. It smelled of dust, of something faintly metallic, and something else, something she couldn't quite place. Her fingers brush against a nearby table. The dust clings thickly to her skin, except for one spot. A perfect circle in the dust, as if something had sat there for years and had only just been moved. And then she saw her. Sarah turns sharply. A figure stands at the edge of the hallway. A woman, small, frail, draped in a heavy shawl that seems to swallow her frame. Her face, hidden in shadow, tilts slightly as if studying Sarah. "You're cold," the woman said, her voice quiet, measured. "Come, sit." Sarah hesitates, but she forces a nod. She doesn't want to be rude. She just needs a phone, just needs to call someone. Then she'll be gone. The hallway was long, too long. The house had seemed small from the outside, but inside it felt endless. The further she walked, the more the shadows seemed to stretch. A floorboard groans under her weight. She glances at the photos, black and white portraits, their faces blank, eyes faded. One of them, she swears, looks like her. But that's impossible. "Sit here." The woman gestured toward a worn-out armchair in the living room. "You must be tired." Sarah hesitates but sits. The chair is stiff, uncomfortable, but the old woman settles across from her with eerie ease, watching, waiting. I just need to use a phone," Sarah finally says, trying to ignore the way the woman's gaze lingers, unblinking. "No phones here," the woman says simply. "Not anymore." It was such a strange response. Not a simple, "No, I don't have one." Not the lines down. Just, "Not anymore." Sarah forces a smile, nodding as if that answer makes sense, but her fingers tighten around the armrests. The wind outside picks up again, just slightly, the sound of branches tapping against glass. Sarah clears her throat, shifting in the chair. "Do you live alone?" she asks, trying to sound casual. But even as she says it, she isn't sure why. Maybe because the house feels off, too empty despite the heavy air. Maybe because of that feeling like someone else was watching. The woman's smile lingers, but her head tilts ever so slightly. "Oh, sometimes," she answers. Sarah's stomach tightens. A pause. The old woman looks toward the hallway where the shadows seem to stretch further than before. "Would you like some tea?" The question hangs in the air. There's no movement, no sound, but suddenly Sarah feels colder. Her fingers twitch against the chair's fabric. "No, I'm okay, I should probably get going," Sarah says, her voice lighter than she feels. The woman's smile fades, not into a frown, not into anything at all, just blank, as if she had never been smiling in the first place. Then the old woman stands. Without a word, she walks toward the kitchen. Her footsteps make no sound. Sarah swallowed, forcing herself to stay calm. She didn't know why, but something about the woman's movements, so deliberate, so slow, made the hair on the back of her neck stand on end. She looks back toward the front door. It feels farther than it was before. She shifts, glancing at the photos on the wall again. And this time, she notices something. One of the frames, small, dusty, has a picture of a girl. Young, familiar, too familiar. Sarah reaches out, wiping a thin layer of dust from the glass. And when she does, her breath catches in her throat. It was her, or someone who looked exactly like her. She doesn't have time to react, because at that moment, from the kitchen, she hears something she was never meant to hear. She's here, she doesn't remember yet. She was wrong about the house, about the woman, about everything. She wasn't alone. She didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink. The air around her had changed, thicker, heavier, pressing in like an unseen force. That whisper, she was sure she heard it. But the old woman, she hadn't moved her lips. She's here. She doesn't remember yet. The words echoed in her head, twisting into something worse the more she thought about them. She doesn't remember what? What was there to remember? She swallows hard, forcing her voice steady. I should really be going. Thank you for... Before she can finish, a soft, deliberate thud echoes from down the hall, like something heavy, shifting. She wasn't alone in the house. She knew that now. Sarah's body tenses, her breath quickens. The old woman, still standing in the kitchen, doesn't turn around, doesn't acknowledge the noise at all, as if she didn't hear it, as if it wasn't there. There's a storm coming, the old woman murmured, almost to herself. You should stay. Another thud, closer this time. Sarah's pulse spikes, her feet instinctively step back. No, really, I should... A shadow moves at the end of the hall, quick, like a flicker. Her breath catches in her throat. Something was in the house. The old woman finally turns, slow and deliberate. The dim light casts deep shadows over her face, making her features unreadable. You don't remember, do you? Sarah stiffens. The way the woman says it, it's not a question. It's a quiet, knowing statement. A certainty. Sarah can feel it now, something pressing against her skull, a pressure, a weight, something telling her to leave. I think I should go, she mutters, standing too fast, her legs shaky beneath her. The old woman doesn't stop her, doesn't move, just watches. Sarah turns for the front door. She moves quickly, her steps uneven, her breath coming short. She reaches for the handle. It doesn't turn. Her breath hitches. She tries again, harder. It won't budge. She turns sharply. The old woman is still standing in the kitchen, watching, expression unreadable. Why won't it open? The woman tilts her head, a beat of silence, then, softly, You never left. Sarah's stomach twists. The walls suddenly feel closer, the air heavier. The whispering static grows louder, crawling under her skin. She yanks at the door handle, harder this time. The lamp flickers. The hallway darkens. That thing at the end of the corridor, it's closer now. Her breath stumbles, her hands shake, and then the radio shifts. The static distorts, morphing, twisting, until it forms a voice. A voice she knows. Her own. Sarah's vision swims. The walls feel wrong. The floor tilts. Her own voice echoes back at her, warped, fractured, like something clawing its way through time. It wasn't just her voice, it was her. The memories hit her all at once, jagged, broken, slipping through her fingers like sand. Flashes of something she had forgotten, or something taken. The road, the car breaking down, the house knocking on the door. The old woman's voice, soft, welcoming, stepping inside, the air thickening, the sound of a door closing behind her. And then, nothing, just static. Her own voice lost in the crackling void, begging for help she never got. She had been here before, and she had never left. Sarah staggers back, her head pounding, the room warping around her. She looks at the photos again, her face staring back from a dozen frames, captured in different years, different times, over and over. She looks toward the hallway. The door at the end is open now, and in the darkness, something moves. Not a shadow, not a trick of the light, something real, and it's watching her. The old woman steps closer now, her expression eerily calm. "You can't leave," she says softly. "Not yet." The thing in the hallway shifts, one slow, deliberate step forward. The floor groans beneath its weight. Sarah's pulse pounds in her ears. She yanks at the door handle again, desperate, frantic. The radio hisses, her own voice splintering through the static. "You shouldn't have come here." But she did come here, and now she was part of it. She wasn't supposed to remember. That's why they kept bringing her back. Sarah is frozen at the door, fingers still gripping the useless handle. Behind her, the old woman's voice lingers, gentle, almost pitying. "It's all right, dear. You always fight it at first, but it never lasts long." Sarah's breathing sharpens. Her pulse pounds in her ears. The shadow in the hallway moves again, closer now. Its shape is wrong, shifting, warping with every flicker of light. And then, softly, it speaks. "You've been here before." Sarah's stomach twists violently. The voice, it's her own, distorted, fractured, slipping between layers of static and silence. "No," she whispers, shaking her head. "No, I was just looking for help. I was—" The words die in her throat. The photos on the wall, she sees them now. Not just old, dusty frames. Not just familiar faces. Every single one is her. Different clothes, different years, different versions of herself. 100 lifetimes caught in still frames, staring back at her. And beneath each one, a single label carved into the wood. Lost. Her body feels cold. Wrong. Like something inside her is unraveling. She wasn't just trapped, she was being erased. The radio crackles, the lamp buzzes. The shadow in the hallway stretches forward, inching closer, slow and deliberate. And Sarah, she can feel it now. The pull, the way the air seems to shift around her, pressing against her skin like unseen hands. The old woman tilts her head, eyes unreadable. "It's starting," she murmurs. "Don't fight it. You never win." Sarah stumbles back. The door won't open, but the walls, they feel closer now. The entire house seems to breathe around her. It remembers her. It has always remembered her. The photos, the voices, the storm outside, all of it, cycling over and over again. A loop, a trap, a nightmare that doesn't end. Her breath stutters. She whirls back to the hallway. The thing in the shadows, it's almost at the threshold now. Tall, hollow, reaching. And then everything stops. The lights go out. Sarah can't move. She can't breathe. The air is thick with something she can't see, an invisible force pressing against her chest, against her mind. Then, a whisper. Close, just behind her ear. "You were never meant to leave." Sarah gasps, jerking away, but the world around her is wrong now. The walls stretch, distort, bend inward like a collapsing tunnel. The floor tilts, pulling her toward the hallway, toward the darkness. And in the radio's dying static, her own voice echoes. "Help me." She had begged before, many times, but no one ever heard her. Sarah's vision blurs. Her body feels heavy, her mind splitting, fragmenting like a shattered mirror. She grips the doorframe, nails digging into the wood, trying to hold on, trying to stay. The old woman stands nearby, watching, silent, waiting. "Please," Sarah whispers, voice breaking. "I don't want to." The shadow moves faster now, rushing toward her. The walls collapse. The whispering static builds, louder, sharper, screaming now. The storm is gone. The wind has died. The house is still. A knock at the door, slow, hesitant. The old woman stands, her movements calm, deliberate. She steps toward the door, placing a frail hand on the handle. A pause. Then, softly, she opens it. Standing on the porch is a young woman, soaking wet from the storm, shivering, lost. Sarah. But she doesn't look afraid anymore. Her expression is blank, empty, like someone who has forgotten what fear feels like at all. The old woman smiles gently. "Come inside, dear. You must be tired." Sarah nods, steps inside. The door swings shut behind her. No one ever really leaves. The clock on the wall ticks forward as if nothing happened. The air smells of dust and rain, thick with something old, something heavy. The old woman moves through the house like she has done this 1,000 times before. She sets a fresh kettle on the stove, pulls out an extra cup, waits. Sarah is seated at the table, hands resting in her lap. Her face is expressionless, her eyes dull, unfocused. She doesn't seem confused anymore. She doesn't seem afraid. In fact, she doesn't seem like herself at all. She wasn't afraid anymore. The fear had been taken from her, stripped away piece by piece until all that remained was silence. The old woman places a steaming cup in front of Sarah. A quiet pause. "You remember now, don't you?" Sarah blinks slowly. Her fingers twitch against the porcelain cup, but she doesn't answer. The silence stretches. Outside, the wind stirs. The trees shift, restless. The house listens. Sarah turns her head slightly, looking at them, studying them. Something in her expression shifts. Not recognition, not fear. Acceptance. This was not the first time she had sat at this table, not the first time she had knocked on that door. And certainly, not the first time she had forgotten. She exhales slowly, setting the cup down. The old woman watches her, patient, expectant. "You always come back," the woman says gently. "And when you do, you always forget." Sarah's hands tighten around the edge of the table, a flicker of something in her eyes, confusion, resistance. But it fades as quickly as it came. She lets go. The house exhales as if pleased. The night moves on. The old woman clears the table. The radio hums softly, static drifting in and out like a half-heard conversation. Sarah sits still, unmoving. Her breathing is even now, calm, as if she has finally given in to whatever force has been pulling at her. She wasn't the first to sit in that chair, and she wouldn't be the last. A knock at the door. The old woman straightens, brushes her hands on her apron, moves toward the entrance with the same unhurried steps. Sarah doesn't turn, doesn't react. The door creaks open. A gust of cool night air slips into the house, and standing on the porch, drenched from the storm, shivering, eyes wide with the unmistakable look of someone lost, is a young woman. It's Sarah. Again. The young Sarah swallows, her voice trembling slightly. "Please, I need help." The old woman tilts her head, a small smile curling at the edges of her lips. "Come inside, dear. You must be tired." The young Sarah hesitates, but only for a moment. Then slowly she steps forward, crossing the threshold. The door swings shut behind her. Inside, the other Sarah remains at the table, staring blankly ahead, unmoving, unblinking, as if she isn't really there at all anymore. She had made her choice, but was it ever truly hers to make? The house remains, silent, unchanged, a place where time doesn't move forward. It only loops, again and again, a web of forgotten souls. What would you do if you knocked on a stranger's door and found yourself waiting on the other side? Some doors should never be opened, and some questions should never be asked. But now that you've heard her story, tell me, what do you think really happened? Leave your theories in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this unsettling tale, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because next time, the knock might be at your door.